Well, welcome to the Seven Figure Builder Show. My name is Julie Baranek, founder of Seven Figure Builder, where we help high-achieving CEOs connect with their dream clients to scale to seven figures and beyond. And I'm here today with my awesome friend, Deven Rodriguez, the host of Storypreneur, and just all-around amazing guy. So Deven, hey, welcome to have you.
Hello, my friend. It is a plum-pleasing pleasure. And Julie, I want to tell your audience that they have one of the best hosts in the world in you. I was just telling you before we got started, I love your show. You bring on some of the best guests in the world, and your ability to ask questions is second to none. And that's why people listen to this show. So I want to acknowledge you for doing the work that you do, because it isn't easy. And you are just doing incredible work, seriously. And I mean that. So thank you for allowing me to be here today. I'm ready to rock and roll and to give the audience hopefully a thing or two that they can take home with them.
That means the world to me. I really, really appreciate that, Deven. So thank you.
You're welcome.
Yeah. So tell me, where in the world are you? I know you've been traveling like crazy, but where are you today?
Yeah. I live in Southern Florida. So I live down in the Fort Lauderdale area, about 30 minutes away from Miami. I just moved here. I grew up in New York City, and then I'm actually still active duty in the military. So I moved to Georgia, and then I have been living in Southern Florida for about 6 months now. So it's current when we're recording this. It's December 1st. And boy, there's no greater feeling than going outside, and it's about 75 degrees right now. Oh, it feels good, Julie. It feels good.
For sure. And I am back up in your stomping grounds. I'm in Maryland. So I am up north, and it is cold outside. I am jealous. I will be the first to say that. So for those that haven't had the pleasure to meet you yet, can you tell us a bit about your business, all the amazing work that you do?
Sure. So my business is pretty straightforward. The name of my business is Storypreneur. And really, Julie, we'll dive into the story, I'm sure, a little bit, so I won't give too much of it right now. But about 2.5 years ago, I started working one-on-one with a gentleman by the name of Les Brown. And he started to coach me one-on-one to improve my ability to communicate my message and share my story. At the time, I thought I was like the best speaker in the world, but now I realize, like, God, you were so bad. But when I started to do that, something crazy happened. People started to come to me and say, Deven, can you teach me how to do that? I said, teach you how to do what? They said, can you teach me how to share my message, my story? I was like, okay, I guess so, because I had negative $7 in the bank account when Heidi sent me that message. But what that transformed into is what I'm doing now, where, if I'm being quite honest, I had that program for about 2 years where I was just teaching storytelling. But the biggest piece that was missing was students would graduate from my program, be able to tell amazing stories and communicate their message. But when they left, so many of them never had a platform to share that message. And that's where the business that I'm in now currently came into play, which is where now I'm helping entrepreneurs and CEOs who are at a high level share that story and spread their message by getting booked on top-rated podcasts. So that's what I do. We have like a done-for-you model where we get people booked on shows and we just do it for them. We've been blessed to work with some really awesome people, and it's a really great business because my whole mission in life is to do for other people what other people did for me, because I grew up in a really tumultuous situation where I was facing a lot of bullying. And the thing that changed my life was listening to other people's stories. And now with my work, I have the ability to get people on platforms where they can share their story. And now they're impacting another Deven who's also being bullied, who's going through something. So like when I look at my work, it's more than like a typical quote unquote agency where I'm just getting people booked on podcasts. Like I can make a lot of money doing other things, but for me, it's if I help Julie or if I help somebody else get that message out and touch somebody, for me, that's really powerful. So that's the business we're in. We're in the business of connecting podcast guests with podcast hosts and really making some magic happen in the middle.
I love it. And, stories are so powerful. Like, I think they're so underrated, and it's so much part of our human thread, right? Like of our DNA, that we, from the early days of our existence, we would communicate through story. And what have you seen through this journey that you've been on, but just the transformational power of story? Like, is there something, a story for example, that comes to mind for that?
Well, I think it's not so much a story, but I think it's kind of a couple of different stories. And this is where I'll take it, probably somewhere that not too many people that are listening thought I would take this. But here's what I realized along my journey, where I've coached thousands of people now in terms of storytelling specifically. The biggest thing that people don't realize how powerful the story that they have is. I'll give you an example. There was once a woman named Naomi. And Naomi started, this was about 2 years ago. She and I started to work together. And at that time, to be honest, I didn't have much of a framework built out. Like I was just figuring things out. Like, what am I doing? But anyways, Naomi came. She was like, Deven, I really want to share my story. I said, okay, Naomi. I had a group coaching program, and Naomi would show up every week, and we would share a lot of stories, give feedback, give coaching. And I'll say, okay, Naomi, are you ready? She was like, no. She said, I feel really uncomfortable and I want to leave. In front of a group of like 5-6 people. I'm like, oh my goodness. I was like, okay, Naomi, like you could leave. And she's like, no, I'm going to stay. So that went on for about 3 months. And then finally Naomi opened up one day and she's like, okay, Deven, I'm ready to share now. And I'm like, wow, incredible. And then she delivered the most compelling story that I've probably ever heard. And she said, Deven, I want to tell you the reason why I haven't been sharing for the past 3 months. She said, in my entire life, I've been abused. I've been beaten. I was given up to foster care. And I'm what they call a selective mute, meaning I literally do not speak in public because I've been traumatized so much throughout my life. And when she started to tell that story, I was like, oh my goodness, this is incredible. Fast forward about 6 months, one day I'm scrolling on Facebook, What do I see? I see that same shy girl who was a mute posting a dancing and singing video on Facebook. I'm like, no, is that Naomi? I message her and I come to find out, she says, Deven, you'll never believe what happened. I said, what happened? She said, I ended up speaking in front of 60,000 people.
Oh my God.
I was like, wow. See, what happened with Naomi was she realized how powerful the message that she had was. And what so many of us, I was just on a call last night because although my business now is getting people on podcasts, that's where most companies stop. What I try to do, it's like a personal trainer. Like, let's say you hired a personal trainer and all they said was go to the gym. Well, how do you lift a weight? What cardio machines do I use? Am I doing the form right? So the easy part is getting on the podcast. The hard part is being a guest worth listening to. So for example, like I was on a call with somebody else last night and she's like, wow, I just didn't realize that what I had was this powerful. And I'll tell you how my little process behind this. So Les Brown one day, we're sitting there and he says, Deven, he started asking me questions, oh, who's someone impactful in your life? This. He says, can I take a crack at it? I said, can you take a crack at it? What do you mean? He said, yeah, I'm going to tell your story back to you as if I were you. I was like, yeah, right. Sure enough, he knocked my socks off. And I don't know how, Julie, if it was just by hanging out with him or like being really close with him or just doing the work that I've been doing. That's really what I do with the people that I work with is that's one of the first things that I do is sometimes in life, you don't understand how powerful your message is until you hear it being said back to you. And I've gotten tears. I've gotten people break down because I want everybody to understand and to realize that the story that you're sitting on is the story that somebody else is waiting on. And sometimes you don't understand it until you're hearing it back to your. So that's where I want to start with this, Julie, is the foundation of all of this. It's not about getting on a podcast. It's not about making money. It's understanding that the story that you are sitting on is the story that somebody else is waiting on. Somebody wants to hear that message. Somebody wants to hear that. I'll give you an example. I was on a call last night and this woman, she helps women over the age of 35 who are new mothers. And I was like, okay, we're going to call her Victoria. I was like, okay, Victoria, tell me about the time when you said you were on the couch drinking wine in a blanket because you were just so overwhelmed. And then she went on, she's like, Deven, I just couldn't do it anymore. I would look at my son with guilt because I didn't think I was the mother that I should be. And I was like, that's what you need to share because there's so many people that are in that position right now. But it's like, oh, okay, the first step to it is understanding that this is powerful, that this is impactful. And it's not just about some canned, templated ChatGPT story that is like thrown around all over the internet now. It's about really getting in touch with what you've been through, but who you've become at the same time. So it's about really understanding you got some powerful stuff within you. And the longer that you delay putting it out into the world is the longer that other people have to suffer as a result of you holding back.
100%. And I think the key in what I'm hearing is just that place of vulnerability, I think is where you get that human connection. And how would you encourage people? Like when we think of our stories, we've got a lifetime of stories, right? But how would you encourage people to sift through that lifetime of stories to be able to pull it into something that's easy to communicate with somebody else and be able to connect with them on an emotional level?
Perfect. I love this. This is fresh on my mind. So one of the things I'll tell you is do not just think of the word story. Whenever we hear story, we think this one big drawn out story, like 30 pounds, and you get overwhelmed. Like, oh my God, I got to put all my whole life into one story. Here's what I learned over my years. The greatest storytellers are able to take seemingly ordinary experiences and turn them into extraordinary stories. I'll give you an example. I just got a treadmill and we got it for like $130. It was cheap. And then it started to work, and then all of a sudden stopped working. And what that made me realize was that sometimes it's better to invest in something more expensive because it's going to work better. So like, that's just an example. I took an example of a treadmill not working and turned it into a story. So here's what I want people to do. Number one, nobody cares about you. I'll never forget, Julie, Les Brown called me up 12 hours before my TED Talk. I sent him a recording of me practicing, and I said, please review this. He called me up 12 hours before. He said, Deven, you driving? I was like, yeah. He's like, you probably want to sit down for this. I was like, oh boy, here we go. I was like, yes, sir. He said, that message that you sent me, he said, you can't share that.
Oh no.
I said, Les, it's 12 hours before. He said, you are sharing what you want to share, but it's not what the audience needs to hear. He said, Deven, there's 3 things that you have to consider whenever you're delivering any message. This is what you answer before you start to prepare. Well, I should say, this is what the audience is thinking, but you have to answer this for them before you ever show up. Number 1, who are you? That's a pretty simple one. Number 2, what do you have for me? And number 3, why should I care? So the most of the time though, when we're developing our presentation or thinking about the message, we just think about like, what's in it for me, or I want to look good. But where we really have to start is with the audience. So when you get in that frame of mind that they're thinking on a subconscious level, these 3 things: number 1, who are you? Number 2, what do you have for me? Number 3, why should I care? So now what that enables me to do is begin to frame my message in terms of the audience. And then this is what I want to say in terms of answering your specific question about sifting through all of these stories. I can sit here and tell you about like your signature story and all of that great stuff, but here's the reality of the situation. There's not many people that can relate to Julie's exact big life story of triumph and overcome. What they will relate to the most is the moment when Deven was in his car and he stayed in the car for 30 minutes on his phone procrastinating because he just didn't want to go in the gym and it was easier to stay in the car. Or the moment where you were on a diet, you opened up the refrigerator, there was a piece of cheesecake, and there was one part of your mind pulling you back, and there was another part of your mind telling you to go for it. And then you gave in and it made you feel like crap. You looked in the mirror and you said, damn, I gave up again. That is what people can relate to, but that's not a big story. That's just one instance. So what I need people to understand is that it's not about this big drawn out story. It's about those little experiences that you have on a daily basis. So there's 4 questions I want everybody to think about. Commit to these questions for maybe the next 5 to 7 days. The first question to ask yourself at the end of every day: number 1, what was something impactful that happened today? Number 2, why did this impact me? Number 3, what is the lesson that I learned from this? And number 4, what is the lesson for the audience? Or what is the lesson for other people? Here's a quick example. Okay, something impactful that happened to me today. I got a new treadmill, came from Walmart, did not work, worked for 10 minutes, and then started doing something. Now I have to return it. So part 1 is just you're describing the experience. You're not attaching any feelings, any emotions. You're just describing black and white exactly what happened. Number 2, why was this impactful to me? Well, it was impactful to me because I really just went the cheap route. I wanted to get something cheap, but then I was looking at it and I was saying to myself, like, damn, I really wish I would have got something more expensive. So maybe it worked better. And then number 3, what's the lesson that I learned? Okay, the lesson that I learned is that sometimes it's better to spend a little extra money because price is what you pay, but value is what you get. Oh, okay, cool. But here's the thing. That's where most people stop. Most people stop at what I learned. The audience don't give a crap about what you learned. They care about what can I learn? So now you go to step number 4, which is what is the lesson for the audience? So the lesson for my audience, or the lesson for other people, is that you can't make decisions based on price, because price will not determine the value that you get in exchange for the money that you pay. So that's just an experience that I had with a treadmill that I can turn into a story that can relate to other people. So ask yourself those 4 questions every night for maybe the next 5 to 7 nights. And I guarantee you what you'll begin to notice is that you'll have these buckets of stories that begin to relate to people on a one-to-one level. So look at those little things. It's not in the big triumphs and successes and failures. It's in those little experiences where you woke up and you laid in bed for 30 minutes thinking, what the hell am I going to do today? People relate more to that than they do, the big failure or the big success, because that's unique to you.
Yeah, no, that's so powerful. And, as people are thinking through those questions, would you encourage them to journal it? Like, I know I have a hard time remembering stories, so
Yeah.
it's easier for me to like jot something down and then come back to it later. What do you recommend for people?
Yeah. So I actually have something. I haven't even given it away in like probably over a year. I don't even give it to anybody anymore, but you can journal it. But if anybody wants, I have something called the 90-day Storyteller's Journal. And this was like one of the first things that I ever created about 2 years ago. And I just updated it like a year ago. But if anybody does want it, is it okay if I give it to them, Julie?
Absolutely. Please do.
Okay. If you guys do want it, you can just go over. I'm trying to grow my LinkedIn. You can go to my LinkedIn, which is Deven Rodriguez. That's Deven Rodriguez. And just send me the word 7-figure and I'll send it to you. But regardless of that, just take out a journal, piece of paper, or you can go on an Excel sheet. I've worked that works very well, because then you'll be able to build a digital library where you can just hit Command F and you can just look for a story that you had on a particular day. So there's multiple ways to skin the cat, but do something that works for you. But the whole point is to begin to document it. So I don't just sit there and just think about it. No, put it on some paper, put it on a Google Doc and a Google Sheet, so that now in a year from now, this is what's best. You could look back and be like, damn, that's where I was. That's what I was doing. And you feel good about that. So that's what I recommend personally. Yeah.
I love that. And that's like an exercise. Like you're building that muscle memory as you're going through that exercise every day. And then your brain starts to naturally take those tiny, seemingly insignificant moments and turn it into, what does my audience need to hear today? Right. Which is ultimately what you're after and what you're telling us to be after. Right. Because that's those insignificant moments, and they're not insignificant, but those tiny moments connected to a life lesson are exactly what people need to hear and are most relatable to. Right.
Exactly. Yep. It heightens their sense of awareness. Now you're going to be looking for the thing. You're going to be looking for the lesson in the day.
I love it. And how does that tie in? You mentioned earlier about being a guest worth listening to, right? Like we want to be relatable. We want to connect with people, but how do you see those, pieces fitting together?
Yeah, it starts from the jump, really. I'd say the biggest mistake people make when being a guest on other people's podcasts is they try to be perfect. They try to just demonstrate their expertise. They don't want to be vulnerable. They don't want to tell like, hey, I screwed up. They want to be perfect because they think, oh, the audience is going to judge me. I got to look good. I got to make a sale. If you're listening to me, can I tell you something? I genuinely don't care if anybody listening to this ever gives me $1. I do not care. What's most important to me is that just one person listening to this is impacted. So I think when we disconnect from the need to get something from the audience, we're able to deliver a more compelling, a more engaging, and a more entertaining conversation. So really it comes down to, okay, like you said earlier, Julie, that sense of vulnerability, being willing to open the door to who you really are, not just who you want people to think you are. Because the reality of the situation is, I heard this quote once, and the quote is, people will never be able to know that you understand them until they know that you understand their failures. And the only way that someone will know if you understand their failures is if you share your own. So if you're listening to me and you're a guest on other people's podcasts, the greatest thing that you could do is, like, I failed in 2021. I failed something called Army Ranger School. Almost everybody's supposed to pass it. I failed it, right? But I want to share that, because the job with storytelling, if you guys don't take anything else away, write this down on your forehead, on your mirror, somewhere. Our job on a podcast is to verbalize what they internalize. Here's what I mean by that. There's someone listening to this right now that's in a position where they're like, they repeat this to themselves. I don't know if this is going to work out. Why is this going so slow? I wish this could go faster. Why doesn't my family support me? But here's the thing. They'll never dare tell anybody else that, because they're worried about what other people will say, rejection, etc., for whatever reason, right? We've all been there. So now, what if I come along on a podcast and I share that just a month ago, I had negative $231 in my bank account, and I was thinking to myself, how am I going to make this work? It just isn't going fast. Like, it's not working. how to drain my savings account. Now I'm verbalizing something that they're keeping inside. So now they say, wow, this person really understands me. So we begin to show them like, hey, I'm a lot more like you than you think, but I can also take you to where you want to go. So being a guest worth listening to is sharing those moments of vulnerability in a way that you attach a lesson to it. So guys, the point isn't just to share a story for story's sake. As my mentor taught me, he said, you never tell a story without a point, and you never tell a point without a story. So if I'm going to talk about goal setting, I'm going to tell a story about goal setting. If I'm going to talk about being a guest on people's podcasts, I'm going to tell a story about being a guest on other people's podcasts, because it, like you said, storytelling is in our human nature. So yeah, being a guest worth listening to, we can dive a lot more into that, but that's like on a surface level. Really what I would say to that is be willing to show the sides of you that you don't want to share, because what you're afraid to share is what they need to hear.
Absolutely. And that's what gets it to be concreted in our brains. Like, I'm chuckling to myself because in our house, my husband is huge on life lessons. So like every day, all day long with the kids, it's life lessons. And I'm like, really? Like, it's too early for this. Like, it's never too early for this. Life lesson, 85,000, and it's just a continual thing. But it's similar with, as you mentioned, with storytelling and being able to convey that vulnerability and that meaning of life, quite frankly, and like how those things connect, and then what you learned and how to take that moving forward. So I love that. So that definitely hits home for me. So I appreciate that very much.
Of course.
So you are eyeball deep into the world of podcasting, as am I, of course. But I wanted to get your take on what have you seen is the power of podcasting? Like, how has that impacted you, of course, impacted your clients, impacted your guests? Like, what have you seen there?
Yeah, Julie. So I started a podcast 6 years ago. And at the time, the name of the podcast was the One Life Podcast. And how it started out was my grandmother tragically died from a heart attack, like out of nowhere. And the only thing that I could think to myself was, man, this made me realize that I only have one life to live. So I started a podcast called the One Life Podcast. And the whole, like, when I would do my outro, the outro would be, you only have one life to live. There's no time to wait. So you better act now. So it was all about really helping people take advantage of the one life that they have to live. And I would do solo episodes. And then I would also I've had all of the biggest guests in the business world specifically on the show. But here's what I'll tell people in terms of podcasting. If you're thinking about starting a podcast, I want to encourage you, go and do it. But also understand that unless you hire someone like Julie, that it's going to take a really long time to come off of the ground. Because it's something where unless you're Kim Kardashian or you're famous already, you're not going to have that audience. However, I want you to also understand this. I've been able to interview people that I otherwise would have never been able to get into the room with. So it's your best ability, it's your greatest ability to network and connect with people, and also get free coaching from people that you want to connect with. Like when I host a podcast, you damn right, I'm going to ask some questions I personally want to know the answer to. Right? So it's a really good tool if you can delay gratification. Just want you guys to understand that. Now, so that really impacted me because I was able to connect with a lot of really awesome people. I think another aspect that a lot of people miss when it comes to podcast hosting, like as a host, is that you have the ability to earn affiliate commissions from people. So I've earned tens of thousands of dollars from just one person, from him being a guest on my podcast and promoting something that he had. So that's something to consider for everybody that's listening, but let's get out of the weeds a little bit. That is not the highest leverage opportunity, though. In my opinion, the highest leverage opportunity, and how we're going to define leverage, is getting more out of the effort that you put in, is from being a guest on other people's podcasts. A couple of weeks ago, I was hanging out on Zoom just like this with a friend of mine, John Lee Dumas of Entrepreneurs on Fire. And I said, John, why is podcast guesting and being a guest on other people's podcasts, why is that so powerful? And he said, Deven, I want you to think about this. You come on my show. I've built my audience over the course of the past 12 years. And in 12 minutes, you're able to get that audience. That's 1.5 million people per month. So really, when you think about leverage, and that is the one thing that all successful people think in terms of, is leverage. You can post on social media, but what if the algorithm hates you? You can do Facebook ads, but what if you wake up like my friend did this morning and say, my ads were shut off and I don't know why? But guess what's going to happen when you're on a podcast that is specifically designed or I should say, has your specific target audience. Like Julie, the only people that I know are listening to this show are people that want to grow their business. And if I'm a business coach, what better podcast to be on than a show that has people that want to grow their business? So there's no guesswork involved. There's no hoping in the algorithm. There's no hoping that Mark Zuckerberg doesn't wake up angry at his wife tomorrow and decide to change the algorithm, or there's another iOS update that changes everything with ads. You don't have to wait for another referral that you don't know when is coming, or what everybody loves. You don't have to go and send 100 cold DMs in hopes that just 30 people respond and you can book 5 calls. So when you're a guest on somebody else's podcast, what you have the ability to do is just simply go to direct to your audience, speak to them, give them a call to action, and get them to come to you to hunt you down and to be a client. But people don't think like that. I didn't think like that until I heard this quote by James Clear. This is what inspired me to start doing what I'm doing now. Podcast host once asked James Clear of Atomic Habits, they said, James, what is one thing that you say no to a lot? James said, I say no a lot to public speaking on stages. And he said, that's actually why I charge $200,000 an hour.
Wow.
So that more people will say no. And they said, what? Why would you say no to 200 grand an hour? He says, because when I do the work dies. He said, in other words, when I'm done with my speech, nobody will ever hear that message again. But then he turned to the host, and I was driving home about 5 minutes away. I remember exactly where I was. This one, it all clicked. He said, but you see what we're doing right now on this podcast? He said, this is work that when I do it just one time, will continue to work for me forever. So in a year from now, somebody can be listening to this and go buy my book. In a year from now, somebody can be listening to this and want to be a consulting client. So people need to start to ask themselves, what is the work that when I do it just one time will continue to work for me forever? Let me put a bow on it to give a really practical example, because you said your audience is 6- and 7-figure entrepreneurs. Chances are there's some people running ads. I want to give you an example. I have a client, a friend, his name is Tanner Chittister. He spends about $250,000 to $500,000 per month in ads. In order for him to get 5 million people to see his ads would cost him 100 grand. We were able to get him in front of 5 million people this month on 15 podcasts, the biggest ones in the world. Therefore, getting him, allowing him to save $100,000 in ads. So when you guys are thinking about it, not only does it allow you to have a bigger impact, but it puts more money in your pocket, because now you're just able to go directly to your folks, speak to them. And if you're able to get on the right podcast and they have an audience, well, then you don't have to spend as much money on advertising, because you can get the same amount of impressions, the same amount of eyeballs by just going on a podcast. And here's the difference. Podcast listeners are in a learning mentality. Nobody comes to a podcast to just scroll one by one by one, like on an Instagram post or a reel. They're here because they want to learn something. So it's so much different than all of these short form pieces of content out there. But whether you're looking at being a guest on podcast or being a host of a podcast, I mean, just do it, because they've both been just the best decisions of my life. And it could seem intimidating, especially starting one of your own, because there's a tech, but that's why you have Julie, who will help you out with that. It's a great decision, because I guarantee you'll never look back 20 years from now and say, damn, I regret starting that. That's not going to happen.
I agree 1,000%. And just to add on to that, if I may, so you mentioned of connecting with other people and using their audiences. You're essentially borrowing other people's audiences, established audiences that you won't naturally have the ability to get in front of. So it's a very targeted audience because you chose them to begin with, to connect with, right? And it's an evergreen way to be able to have that content, which is so powerful that people forget about. That evergreen selling, that content lives on forever, and you get massive SEO value from it, right? That you put in Deven's name and it's everywhere because he's everywhere. And I mean, the benefits and all of it go on and on and on. So I absolutely love that. And I agree. I've learned so much in my podcasting, and I do a crazy amount of it, and I do it because I enjoy it. But I learn constantly. And the question, we were talking about that before the show, of the questions that we ask, and this show is fully organic, which I think the listeners know, and obviously but it's because of that natural curiosity that I want to pull the gems out from the brilliant people that I surround myself with. So It's just the most incredible opportunity.
Absolutely. It is. It really is. So if you guys are listening to this, you either better start one or you better get on one, because it's just a really, there's so many benefits, like you were saying, Julie.
Absolutely. And Deven, the king of getting you on a podcast. So definitely reach out to him for that. And I want to go back to your experience with Les Brown. So I know you have so many memories about working with him. You know, what was that like, and how it obviously has shifted a lot in your life, you know, just that experience. But can you tell us a little more of that story and what brought you guys together?
Yeah. So I spoke briefly about a failure that I had earlier, Army Ranger School. So this was 2021. Now I'm an officer in the Army. I'm in the infantry. The infantry are like the people that go in and kill the bad guys. It's a lot less glorious than what it sounds like, guys. Okay. I sit at a desk all day and don't do anything. Okay. Anyways, but as an infantry officer, you're expected to go to what they call Army Ranger School, which is a 62-day long leadership course in the Army. It's like the hardest leadership school, whatever. And you're expected to pass it. Long story short, I show up on day one, I failed the swim test, and I'm kicked out of Ranger School on day one. Now, I don't know if the audience has ever had this experience, but you went through something that was negative. You had a failure, you had a setback, you hit an obstacle, but God kind of spoke to you and he said, there's something good that's going to come out of this. And I had that feeling over me. So although I was like upset, I wasn't devastated, because I had this weird sense in my heart that something big was coming, but I didn't know what it was. I woke up the next morning, I still had the sense. I went to bed that night, I still had that sense. One day I went on Instagram and I just took a picture with a black background. And all I put was, I just received the best news of my life. I had my friends call me, my family text me. They're like, Deven, what's the news? I didn't respond to anybody, not because I don't love them, but I didn't have any news. I just really felt something big was coming and I just put it out there. My friend Leslie at the time, she invited me to an app called Clubhouse. It was an audio-based app where you can get into a room with people of similar interest and talk about personal development, mindset. Sure enough, I get on the app and the first room that I see is hosted by Les Brown. Now I'm like, no way, that's Les Brown. I was like, oh, it's like seeing like your idol, your dream person. Because for me at the time, I really wanted to be a motivational speaker. That was my dream. That was my goal. Because remember, that's what changed my life, listening to those types of motivational speeches and inspirational speeches. So anyways, I go into the room and I'm listening to him and he's giving all of these tips. And then he starts to talk about something called hungry to speak. And he said, for anybody that's in the room that is interested in learning how to share their story and tell their message and monetize it. And I'm like, oh my God, that's me, that's me, that's me. So finally he goes, yeah, and the good news about it is I'm opening the group up and it's only $297 a month. I was 22 years old. I just bought a new house, a new car. I got 2 dogs. I got my girlfriend. And I was like, wait a second. Did he just say $297? No, unless I want it, but I can't do that much. So I was like, oh no, what do I do? Because I didn't have any money. So I called up my dad and I said, Dad, you know Les Brown? He's like, yeah, of course I know Les Brown. I said, he's offering his coaching program. And he's like, do it. I said, there's one problem, Dad. Yes, son. It's $297 a month. He said, all right, like, you want me to lend you the money? I said, no, Dad, you really helped me out financially. I don't want the money. He says, all right, then. He said, figure it out. So I got off the call and I had this credit card that I got when I was 17 years old that had 34% interest on it. Took it out and I held it out in front of me and I asked myself the question. I said, are my goals and my dreams worth it? And I said, yeah, I think so. So I signed up for it. 2 weeks go by, I get an email. And in the email, it said, sign up here for a one-on-one onboarding call with somebody on the team. So I'm like, all right, cool. To help me get familiarized with everything. I go on the call and it was me and Les Brown. I'm like, no way. I was like, slap me. Is this reality? He doesn't say hello. He doesn't say hi. He doesn't say how you're doing. He says, son, what do you want to do with your voice? And at the time, remember, I wanted to be a speaker. So I said, sir, I'm going to be the greatest motivational speaker in the world. He said, all right, well, we got some work to do, so let's get started. And that was a group program, but what that transformed into was a deep one-on-one personal relationship, simply because he saw me put forth effort. If you want to network and collaborate and connect with people that are at a higher level than you, this is my advice. When they give you advice, implement on a level that nobody else will be willing to implement, and they will recognize that effort. So what that transformed into was, hey, here's my number. Hey, Devin, it's Les. How you doing? Hey, Les, how you doing? But what I want people to understand about this man in particular, because I'm sure most people listening to this know, is the man that you see, like the man off the screen, the man off of the stage is much more incredible than the man you are on the stage. And there's one thing that he taught me that really changed my life. I was 22 and I was starting to teach people storytelling and so forth. But I was really struggling with one thing, and that was my age. I was like, who the hell is going to listen to a 22-year-old about storytelling? Like, what? Like, who are you to tell me? So I called him up one day. I said, Les, I've been really struggling. He said, what's wrong? I said, my mindset right now is just really not the best. And I just been really in my mind, and I've been struggling. I feel like giving up. He said, what's wrong? I said, Les, who's going to listen to me? I'm just 22. And he said, Devin, I never want you to forget this. He says, you're never too old to learn, and you're never too young to teach. He said, people don't give a rat's ass about your age. They just care about what is the value that you can provide to them. I said, really? He said, yeah. About a month later, I got a client, and she was 67 years old. And I was like, wow, he's right. So it was just, I've been very fortunate to have some really incredible mentors. And for those of you that are listening, you're like, how can I, get in touch with this person? You're asking yourself the wrong question. The question you need to begin to ask yourself is, what can I do to serve this person? When I started my business working with Les Brown to get him booked on Entrepreneurs on Fire, I didn't ask him if I could do it. I did it, and then I brought him the final product, which was, Les, I got this booked for you. You want to go on? When I got Brian Tracy on the #1 marketing podcast last month, he didn't pay me. I just went out. I said to the host, hey, you want to have Brian Tracy? Say, yeah. I went to Brian Tracy and his team. I said, Brian Tracy, want to do podcast? And they said, yes, Brian Tracy, do podcast. But guess what that does? Now I'm connected, because I did something for him without him asking. So that's, in my experience, that has been the biggest shift in my life, is not missing an opportunity because there isn't a paycheck attached to it. That's just something that I really learned. And more importantly, over the past few months has just really changed the course of my life.
Yeah. And a couple of things I just want to touch on there, which I think I love that, because not missing an opportunity because there isn't a paycheck. Like, the more we can provide value, and we hear it all the time, it sounds very cliche, but the more you go above and beyond to serve other people, the more it puts it out there that it comes back to you. You don't need to do things only because there's a paycheck. It will come back and find you.
Let me give you an example. Can I give you an example of that,
Please
Julie?
do.
I'm going to get vulnerable. I've been in a place in my life where I've been struggling, like, for the past 6 months, with the fact of, am I doing what I am called to do? Like, is this aligned with my purpose? About 8 months ago now, I had my biggest month in my business, which was, at the time, it was like $22,000 in a month. Right. And I was like, yeah, I did it. I had my first $20,000. I went from like 5K to like 20. And I was like, wow, like, this is great. But something happened. Instead of that propelling me to even greater heights, I started to really doubt myself. I said, this was a one-time thing. I said, I can't do this again. I'm running out of an audience. And for the next 4 months, I made $0. Zero. I didn't do any of my money-making activities. And I was this close to giving up. I took out my journal one day and I just said, God, please show me what I have to do. And the only thing that came to my mind was a voice that said, Devin, just continue to build the man and I will show you the way. All right, God, I'm just going to focus on my habits. I'm going to focus on my mindset. I'm just going to focus on getting better. I'm not going to stress this whole thing. Then I got a client, like $4,000. For another 3 months, nada. Started doing things for free. I went to somebody and I said, hey, you want to get on podcasts? And he said, yeah. Started getting him on podcasts all over the world, all over the US. And it was special last week, Thanksgiving, because I went home, and for full transparency, I took out my phone and I showed my mom October 27th, 2023. I said, Mom, read that number. And it was minus $231. And then I said, Mom, read this number. And it was like $25,000. And she's like, wow. So I went from literally making no money in my business to having my first $75,000 month. The reason why I share this is that's not all collected, by the way, guys. That's contracted. So I don't have all of that in the bank, just so you guys are, wow. No, like that's, some of them are payment plans, whatever the case may be. But the reason why I share that is this: when I was in a position where I had nothing, that's a very good position to be in, because you also have nothing to lose. I said, I've had multiple overdraft fees. I got nothing to lose. Why would I not do something for free? I have nothing to lose but the world to gain. So many times when we're in a position where we're down and we're out, we're like, what can we do? If you just genuinely start to help other people, serve other people, it will come back to you. Just like Julie said, it's the law of cause and effect. So that is something that is so true, Julie, what you were saying. And it's incredible because, like you said, it has to come back somehow.
And to have faith in that, and faith in that you're doing the right things and just fulfilling the purpose that you're in the world, you know, to accomplish, and touching other people's lives. But I love, you know, that you mentioned that, because when your back's against the wall, you have no choice. Like, you just move forward. That's it.
Yeah, you're absolutely right.
And I think it's also so powerful with the stories that we tell. We have to be mindful of the stories we tell ourselves, right?
Yeah, definitely. That was a workshop that I did back in college. I had an organization called the Society of Growth and Success. And the very first workshop we ever had, I entitled it, What's Your Story? And it was broken down into 3 different stories. It's the story that you tell the outside world, you tell the public about who you are. Then there's a story that you tell yourself about who you are. And then there's the story that you desire to tell yourself about who you are. And oftentimes those 3 stories are in direct contradiction with each other. So I think that the moment that we begin to align those, then we will really begin to take off. But here's what I don't think. I really don't think, and this might be controversial, I don't think belief is required to really get to where you want to go. Because I believe it's really just a game of inputs and outputs. If I want to do, or if I want to achieve X, what do I have to do? For example, if I want to lose 20 pounds, you can do the math or whatever for what it is for you. That means I need to eat 1,800 calories a day. As long as you eat 1,800 calories a day, I don't care if it's Snickers, you're going to lose 20 pounds. Same thing with business. If I want to generate $10,000 this month, if I want to generate $20,000 this month, how many sales calls do I need to have? Right? So when we just start to define it, but by inputs and outputs, it makes the game a lot easier. And what happens is then you begin to develop the belief when you start to see the result. So that's been a really big shift for me. I used to think belief was really, really required, but it's really hard to believe in yourself when there's no evidence of the belief. Like, I had done really well in school, but now it's business and it's something like a lot different, you know? But yeah, I definitely agreed. It really is that story that we tell ourselves. But I think it's just when you know there's some work that has to be done, it just makes things not easier, but more clear. And if you're not doing it for some reason, what I advise is to really get with a mentor that can help you, like, call you out on some of the stuff. Because I was by one of my mentors, one of my friends, Tanner's house about a month ago. And he said, Deven, you're in a good spot. Remember where I was. I was in a bad spot. But he said, you're in a good spot. He said, you just need to do your shit. I was like, all right, yeah. And then things turned around. But I had that positive influence to be there for me, to push me, someone I respected, someone that I cared about, and someone that cared about me. So yes, that story we tell ourselves, that's the most important thing that there is in this whole game of storytelling.
Yeah. And when you don't have that belief, just get out there and grind and, like, do those boring, repetitive things, and the belief will come, the success will come.
It's hard. It really is hard. It really is hard. So if you're listening to this, guys, and you're like, man, but it's hard. I mean, I want to tell you, I'm right there with you. There's some days where I'm like, I don't want to do that. I don't want to do that. And sometimes, I'll be honest, sometimes I don't, right? But what I want to tell you guys is, even if there's a day that you don't, it's okay. Just don't do it 2 days in a row, right? So that's my advice. I want you to guys, it's okay if you mess up, if you have a setback. Let's get back on the horse. Let's keep chugging along. As long as you make positive steps forward, as long as you take positive steps, I don't care if it's 1 or if it's 7, you're going in the right direction.
I love it. And you've accomplished a ton in your business, a ton personally, professionally, all the above, right? But how do you define success? What does that look like for you?
Yeah, for me, I think success, it's simple. And this is something that I've had to think about because I was going through this challenging period for the past 8 months, right? Where I was like, what is my purpose? What am I going to do? Couple of things. So to answer the question directly, I think success simply comes down to having a noble pursuit, being in pursuit of something. But that something does not have to be your grand purpose. Because can I be real? Like, I don't know my grand purpose. I don't know many people who do know their big life purpose. But here's what I do know. That instead of thinking about what's my big life purpose, when I was on the couch with Tanner, I asked him this. I was like, man, I'm struggling. Like, I feel like what I'm doing isn't connected with my purpose. He said, you want to know what your purpose is right now? I said, yeah. He said, your purpose is to not be broke. And then it came together when I was reading a book by Benjamin Hardy. And the book said to set contextual goals or have a contextual purpose, meaning make your purpose wherever you are in life. If you're a new mother, your purpose in life is to be the best mother that you can be. Don't worry about 25 years from now. If you're broke, live and you're homeless, don't think if you trying this new startup is for your life purpose. You need to make money. So that's your purpose, point blank, period. So I think it's having something to pursue because I was in a position in my life where I was not pursuing anything. And I woke up just like a zombie, hating my life. But when I start to have a new pursuit, like, okay, I don't know if it's going to work out, but I'm going to wake up and I'm excited about it and doing this, then I felt more energized and ready to go. And sure enough, I feel like that's when we really have that sense of success. I bought a brand new Corvette. I want to sell the thing, right? That thing doesn't do nothing for me. It's a headache. I love it, but now I got to watch the valet, make sure he doesn't scratch like that doesn't bring me the success that I thought or the feeling of success that I thought. It's waking up and being like, all right, let's see what we can do today. That noble pursuit. There is a quote. It's by Theodore Roosevelt, and it's The Man in the Arena. I'm sure some people are familiar with it. I'm going to read it out because this is something that really has impacted me. It says, it is not the critic who counts, not the man who points out how the strong person stumbles or where the doer of deeds could have done them better. The credit belongs to the man who is actually in the arena, whose face is marred by dust and sweat and blood, who strives valiantly, who errs, who comes up short again and again, because there is no effort without error and shortcoming. But who does actually strive to do the deeds? Who knows great enthusiasms? The great devotions, who spends himself in a worthy cause, who at the best knows in the end the triumph of high achievement, and who at the worst, if he fails, at least fails while daring greatly, so that his place shall never be with those cold and timid souls who neither know victory nor defeat. So I think to put like a cap on that, there's a quote by Earl Nightingale. He says that most people tiptoe through life hoping to arrive at death safely. I think for me, success really comes down to being able to get to the end of my life and be proud of the way that I lived. So I think that comes down to being the man in the arena, being willing to show up in face of rejection, face of doubt, and face of all of these things, and to put my best foot forward, but acknowledging I won't be perfect along the way. I'll stumble, I'll bumble, I'll mess up. It's life. We're all human. That's the way it goes sometimes.
Absolutely. And if you put your mind to it and enough hard work, you can accomplish anything. But if you never try, you never get there.
Yep.
I love that. And I'm curious, if you had the attention of the whole world for 5 minutes, what would you tell them?
Yeah, for me, it'd be simple. 5 words. I had to count on my fingers real quick. You are going to die. I really think that that's what I want to impress on people's minds, because in 2016, when I went by my grandmother's house one day, she was this old 4'11" Italian woman from Italy, barely spoke a word of English. I rang on the doorbell. I didn't tell her I was coming. She said, "Oh, Devin, come inside." And I went inside the house and she said, "Devin, I actually prepared food for you in case you came over." Who the hell does that? Right? Who does that? But sure enough, she had some pasta. We had a nice meal, me, my grandfather, and her. And then I got up and I went to go say bye-bye to them. And she said, "Devin, it's been so long since you slept over." would you please just sleep over? And I said, Grandma, listen, I'm at my internship in Manhattan. The train station is closer to my house than it is to here. So I'm just going to sleep over next weekend. 5 days later, my grandmother passed away from a massive heart attack. And at that moment, I realized how stupid I was for thinking that next weekend would come. So that whole experience was the greatest gift that my grandmother could have ever given me, because what she enabled me to realize was I don't have time to wait. So if you're listening to this and there's somebody that you feel like you should be forgiving, but you're like, nah, screw them, forgive them. If you feel like you have to call your mom because you haven't spoken to her in a while, but you're just too busy, call your mom. If you feel like that there's some place you want to go, something you want to do, some dream you want to chase, do it, because you don't know if you'll have the chance to tomorrow. And I think that hell is when you die and you meet the person that you should have become. So I think really it's the ability to understand our mortality. To me, that kind of makes me wake up and want to pursue things instead of putting them off to tomorrow. Understanding I still do sometimes procrastinate. I'm not saying like I'm perfect, but having that understanding of like, this is real. I don't know if I'm waking up tomorrow. It makes you move differently in life. So with that being said, it also allows you to care less about what other people think, because we're all going to the same place. So if you're listening to me, I want you guys to understand, please, one day this whole thing is going to end. And I really do not think I am going to care if somebody got mad about a message that I sent them, but I will regret the time that I didn't send it. So that's really what I would tell the world, Julie, in less than 5 minutes.
I love it. And she sounds a lot like my grandmother, so I can appreciate that very much.
Oh, yeah.
But thank you for that. And how can listeners support you in your work? I know you mentioned your website earlier, but how can they find you online and connect with you?
Sure. Like I said, if you just look up my name pretty much anywhere, Deven, Deven Rodriguez, you just go to any platform. But like I said, right now, I really want to focus on growing my LinkedIn, and I would love to connect with you guys, but I want to give you a little incentive for doing so. So for those of you that have been listening to this, I know we didn't speak too much about it because it wasn't relevant for this conversation, which I'm totally cool with. But we did touch a little bit on it earlier. If you are somebody that is looking to get on podcasts and you really want to amplify your voice and attract your ideal client without spending a ton of time on social media or a bunch of money on advertising, what I want to do, Julie, is typically if you were to go to podcastpitchsecrets.com, don't do that, guys, because I'm about to give you something crazy. If you were to do that and just download my lead magnet, I would give you 1/2 of what I call my podcast pitch secrets. And what it literally is step by step, an entire course of how to send a pitch that a podcast host can't refuse. How do I know they can't refuse it? Because I'm a podcast host, right? So what I did was when I created this, I created it from my perspective. Would I say yes to this? Because there's nothing worse than another agency DMing me or sending me a message with this long drawn out pitch that obviously was written by ChatGPT. So I show you a way that's bulletproof, that I'm not going to say every podcast host will respond because that's impossible, but at least 60% will, and they will have you on their show. But like I was saying, if you were to go to podcastpitchsecrets.com, you get half of it. So it's broken down into 2 sections: how to pitch in the DMs, how to pitch in the emails. What I want to do for your audience, Julie, since they're here, you cannot find this anywhere on the internet. I guarantee you that. If you guys want, I will give you the entire email pitch secrets and DM pitch secrets completely for free. And I want you to go to my LinkedIn, Deven Rodriguez, and I want you to just send me the word or the code word 7-figure. And along with that, I'll send you the Storyteller's Journal as well, which we talked about earlier. So if you don't have LinkedIn, you can go to any other social media, just DM me the word 7-figure, and I'll make sure to send it over because I know you came from Julie's podcast. But Julie, thank you. This has been an incredible experience. I look forward to connecting with your audience and continuing to build our friendship together because you are awesome. And it's just been a really cool time. You're a great interviewer. This was a fun podcast. And thank you for having me on.
Yeah, absolutely, Deven. And guys, seriously, go message Deven. Like, he is incredible at the work that he does. So definitely go check him out. And thank you, Deven, for being on. I've told you before, thank you for your service. It means a lot. And thank you for being on today. And for those that are listening, if you found value in this episode, please do share it. That's how people find us. And you can find me at 7figurebuilder.com. And I look forward to seeing you on the next episode.
Bye for now.